Hey guys, welcome back to Maelstrom Gaming Studios. I'm Craig, and today we're going to do a bit of a tier ranking for you guys. This time, we're going to be tier ranking all of the opponents, roughly, all of the opponents in Warhammer 40k versus the Tyranids. We're going to see which matchups for the Tyranids typically favor the Tyranids, and which ones might be a bit more of an uphill battle for the alien hive mind. If that all sounds good, do like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our content here at Maelstrom Gaming Studios. We've got a lot of Tyranid specific content, though I do want to start reaching out and providing more content for other factions, specifically in the battle reports, but still keep the Tyranid content coming as much as I can. And just want to thank you members as this year wraps up. I'm looking back at everything we were able to accomplish this year, and all of that does come to you guys, members, really make this possible. So thank you guys, thank you everyone, and let's dive into today's video. How I'm doing this tier ranking, there'll be a bunch of tiers, obviously. S tier is going to be our easiest matchups, and F tier will be our hardest matchups. Now, I'm generally ranking these against the Tyranids, knowing that Tyranids have multiple detachments, and some of the armies, like Space Marines, have multiple detachments. It's going to be a general feel. Obviously, if you play a very fluffy Vanguard Onslaught list going into a bunch of tanks that may or may not do very well, unless you play that into a bunch of Genestealer cultists. The Tyranid lists don't, or the Tyranid detachments do obviously play a part in how well the matchup does, but I'm going to try and treat it as a whole, and I'll mention which detachments might work better against which armies. And one other piece of where I got some of this information, because I have not played against every single faction with the Tyranids yet in 10th edition. Played against a lot, but not everyone. I've looked at the Goonhammer article, Goonhammer stats. I'll put a link in the description below, and it can give some tournament stats as to what matchups are the best and worst. I am not going based off of that solely. I'm using some of my own thoughts and play style and tactics into that, but I'm letting that influence my decision a little bit in the cases which I don't know as much. So now, with that, let's go into our first tier, Tier 6, F tier, worst matchup, Death Guard. Now, Goonhammer says that it's only like a 48% win rate against these guys, though I found that to be much less, much less than that in actual practice. As you know, Matt plays with us here on the channel. He's a very, very good Death Guard player, so maybe that hurts a little bit. But in my most recent GT, Tyranids played 5 or 6 games against Death Guard, and zero of us won our games against Death Guard in that tournament. So that, leads me more into it. But some reasons why Death Guard are so nasty is their new contagion bubble, the -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, really hurts our army. We don't have a large amount of rerolls. We really don't have a ton of rerolls. We have a few twin linked options and a few reroll ones to hit options. But those are far and few between compared to some other armies out there. So the -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill really does hurt our damage output, which isn't huge to begin with. If they want and we play Endless Swarm, -1 OC basically nullifies that army. Having only OC 1 on all of your gaunts does make it significantly harder to play Endless Swarm. Mass Indirect from those Plague Burst Crawlers, which are 3 in every list, it often seems. The Mortars just really hurt us, as we have units that don't want to be seen, that will be seen by those. They have long range, high damage. -1 AP is not that big of a deal going into Tyranids because we generally only have a 3, 4, or 5 up save, so that hurts. They also still have good screening units. Nurglings, rapid ingressing or deep striking a unit of Nurglings somewhere that costs them nothing but can cause us problems with our deep striking. And Mortarion is just really hard to kill. I have only once killed Mortarion, and I had to use an assimilator who chose Mortarion as its designated target to kill it while battle shocking Mortarion. That's the only way I was able to do it. It was a pretty good cleanup with that, but still, it is quite difficult to kill him outside of fully teching into killing him. Some potential counters, there aren't many. I'd like to give more, but I do think assimilators do really well because Death Guard are vehicle heavy, and once assimilators can get into combat, they can kill them pretty reliably. Carnifexes with Crushing Claws could be a good one there too. Potentially, but then you have to watch out for the -1 weapon skill. If they are not with Old One-Eye, they'll be hitting on 5s with no rerolls. Could be painful. Invasion Fleet or Synaptic Nexus based shooting could be good to outshoot them. And if you're up against Mortarion, I would say ignore him if you can. Play around him. Just let him do his thing and kill everything else. So F tier, unless you guys have found differently, I think Death Guard are by far our most difficult matchup. Going into tier 5, these armies pose significant challenges, and I am putting the Black Templar, the Custodes, and the Dark Angels in here. Now, I know right now, as it stands, Custodes aren't in the best place rules-wise, though I'm going to take this as if GW can kind of tone down. You'll see Eldar later. If Eldar get toned down, Custodes get toned up. They're general, what they're supposed to do on the battlefield type thing. Should have mentioned that earlier. Custodes are still very tough for Tyranids. They have, along with all these armies, have often very high leadership. A lot of these units are 5s and 6s at worst. So meaning our Battle Shock shenanigans with our Death Leaper and Neurolictors are going to be difficult to pull off. They often bring very durable units that can punch pretty hard. Something Tyranids struggle with. Because we often don't have the punch to just drop those durable units. Sword Brethren and Terminators for the Custody and for the Deathwing are both very tough nuts to crack, and with their high leadership, it's hard to get +1 to wound or any other shenanigans on them. Black Templar and Dark Angels often also bring a lot of Redemptors, and Redemptors are a tough unit as well for us. Yes, they're only toughness 10, but with a 3-up save, potentially a 2-up save, potentially cover and all of that, and the reduced damage by 1, it is tough to bring down multiple Redemptors in a short amount of time where they can punch back pretty hard if we're not careful. Some good counters to this: Invasion Fleet or Synaptic Nexus shooting, again, is the best way. Custodes are very tough if they get in melee, but you have one good swing with an Exocrine or a Maliceptor into a unit of Custodian Guard, and you can drop all of them in a good swing. On average, you're only going to kill a couple of them, but that's pretty good for shooting of those units. Again, the Maliceptors also can give off that -1 hit bubble, which is something. And then I would like Gargoyles and Hormagaunts, Spore Mines even, things to screen out your opponent. Typically speaking, these armies are relatively slow, so getting the early game up there, taking the primary early, screening off your opponent, and then taking those back objectives is a good way to slow down your opponent and keep them trapped, prevent them from scoring primary as fast as possible. I will say, watch out, some Black Templar lists are using like a Repulsor Rush, which I think is really fun, but it is not like a typical play style, so that might change how you play it. But still, general feel of how these armies play, I would say these do cause problems for Tyranids. Beatable, but can cause problems for Tyranids. Going into tier 4, these are tricky armies. I think they might be a little bit easier. The Goonhammer stats on some of these say otherwise, but I think these are easier matchups for us, but still difficult ones to go up against. We've got Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, Orcs, Thousand Suns, World Eaters, and Chaos Space Marines. I toyed with putting Chaos Space Marines down in the tier below. Again, I'm trying to think of, okay, if GW balances any of this, how's the overall feel of the army work out? So I put them here. Maybe they could have easily gone in the tier below. So for most of these armies, well, not most of these, the Orcs and the Knights, they have really good tank shock opportunities, which is not great for Tyranids because we don't have really any defense against tank shock outside of an emissary, outside of an emissary, really. Orcs and Chaos Space Marine bring a lot of OC to the bodies, just a lot of bodies, whether they're Orcs with a lot of 1-wound bodies and it's just a ton to deal with, or it's Chaos Space Marines with their Possessed and their Chosen, who have a lot of high wound count, relatively good durability units that are tough to crack just with how many they're bringing. Those are tough. World Leaders play this very hyper aggressive playstyle where they just bull rush you, and that, if you're bringing a shooty list like a Synaptic Nexus or an Invasion Fleet shooty list, that can be a bad matchup for us because they can use terrain pretty well to hide, and they can bull rush into us. And then if you're playing that kind of list, you just don't have the melee potential to outdo them in melee or even survive or anything, and it'll be a quick game in that regard. Thousand Suns put out an insane amount of dev wounds, which really is a counter to our, our decent toughness and our decent amount of wounds that we are relying on. Their dev wound potential can just shred monsters left and right, which can be terrifying in its own regard. Some potential counters to these armies, again, the Chaos Knights, the Imperial Knights, Orcs, they all have generally lower leadership. We're looking like 7s on average, and then some a little higher, some a little lower. Chaos Knights I think they're 7 all across the board. I'm not sure about Imperial Knights. They might be 7s across, some 6s on the characters. That is our main key to dealing with the Orcs and the Knights, is the Neurolictors. The Knights, if you battle shock them, then a lot of your stuff can start wounding them on 4s, and typically Chaos Knights these days are a lot of little Knights, and if you can wound the little Knights on 4s in melee or in shooting, they do drop fast enough where you can handle them. They're still scary, don't get me wrong, but you have the tools to deal with them. Horus Vexes can do great damage into those armies as well. Orcs have a lot of, meh armor save, 1 or 2 in models. Horus Vexes do great into those things. They are fragile, remember. They are very fragile. Knights can kill them and Orcs can kill them back. But if a Horus Vex gets the charge, it does do a good amount of damage to those armies. The Marine bodies, so the Chaos Space Marines specifically, talk about them. They don't have a ton of resources. I should say the World Leaders and Thousand Suns don't have a ton of resources. So if you can kill them, then you're good. Thousand Suns seem to run out of steam in the turns 3, 4, 5, as long as you are punching at your weight level there. So just focus on killing off the units that give them the Cabal points, and Thousand Suns will drop. World Leaders, they want to come towards you, so if you can use reserves pretty well, kill some units, get angles, that should help you there. And Chaos Space Marines do a little bit of everything. Tier 3, now again, these are slightly favorable, still, pretty even matchups, but they should tend to go in our favor. We have the Eldar, the Drukhari, Demons, Admech, Astra Militarum, and Space Marines. Eldar, still powerful. They've got a ton of shenanigans, both for scoring points, controlling primary, and doing damage. The Incarn is still going to be a massive threat unless GW nerf it or anything. It's a powerful unit to deal with. The Guard can give you a tough mechanized wall, which Tyranids will struggle to deal with if they bring mass tanks, ton of transports, Rogaldorns. Tyranids can only deal with so many tanks a turn. So watch out for those. Marines, they're in here. They could be anything. Typically, Tyranids can do well at killing Marine bodies, but, Marines can also do well at killing bugs. So I'm putting them here because it's a 50-50 matchup. Dark Eldar can sometimes be sneaky tough against Tyranids. They bring a lot of Dark Lances and a lot of lower strength, high AP, and hard-hitting attacks in melee. And that's pretty good against killing Tyranids. We don't have a ton of safe durability against a lot of Dark Lances, so really, if your Dark Eldar opponent is rolling average or a little over average, they can kill a monster to a turn with the amount of Dark Lances Dark Eldar are bringing, which is not great. Their Witches are actually good into Tyranids, which are not great into a lot of things. Their Incubi are good into Tyranids, which are not normally good against a ton of things, but they're good into Tyranids. But so watch out for things like that. And then Demons, they pose a threat. They got a ton of big anti-monster type of stuff. However, they are relying on just a demon save. They're typically lower toughness. We're only looking at like 10s and below, maybe 11s. Nothing too crazy, but they have meh leadership, so we can do the damage to them. Some potential counters here. Again, Vanguard Onslaught can be pretty good against Admech, Drukhari, and Eldari, because they're typically squishier armies, lower toughness, lower armor, or lesser armor saves, so our lower AP, medium strength stuff in that Vanguard Onslaught is good. If you can hit these armies early with, say, things like Gene Stealers, Von Ryan Leapers, outflanking Zoanthropes, it's not a bad option to deal with them pretty quick. And then those armies have the speed to kind of keep up with the mobility and handle them there. Neurolictors are going to be good against all of these factions, except for Marines, often have leadership 6 and 5 across the board. Maybe some 7s in there, but really 6 and 5. Eldari, the only one who have maybe higher leaderships around the 6s, maybe a 5 here or there. Otherwise, it's pretty much 7s. So that should be pretty good, Neurolictors, to bump up your strength dealing with those higher toughness models. And Demons and Eldari are susceptible to being screened out. They like deep striking. They like places to be able to move. If you can put Rippers down, screen out with Gargoyles, prevent them from doing as many shenanigans as they can do, you're going to be looking in a decent favor there. So those are slightly favorable matchups. Now we're going to go into some good matchups, and I don't want to say these as, oh, you're going to fight one of these opponents, you're going to win, no problem. Listen, players and dice matter, but from my general thoughts and experience, these armies tend to be ones Tyranids do well against. All of these aren't, so we got Tau, Gene Stealer Cult, Grey Knights, Sisters, and Necrons. Now, most of these, outside of Necrons can put out some high damage and high strength shots. The rest of the armies really have a ton of medium strength firepower, meaning they will do well at killing our little things and our medium stuff, but they will struggle into the big monsters, which is good because we like our big monsters. All of these armies have some form of decent mobility, whether that's deep striking, redeploying, jet thrusters to move fast, or a lot of tanks to get places wherever you need to go. They all have those sorts of armies. A few of these armies have like one unit that's pretty durable. Necrons can have a few durable units. Grey Knights could have 1 or 2, 3 durable units. Sisters could have 1 okay durable block, but that's it. The rest of the stuff is pretty meh durability, which is what we like because we don't have great damage output. And most of these armies have okay leadership. They're not going to be insane outside of maybe a few Grey Knight units and a few Sister units. So you can get some battle shocks on them with Neurolictors, which is important for Tyranids because Neurolictors are what make Tyranids good. Some counters for these, again, like I said, a lot of these armies will struggle against a lot of monsters. They'll have the firepower to slowly put them down one by one, but you can easily overwhelm a lot of these armies with toughness 11 plus monsters and having a lot of them. So I know from experience, Gene Stealer Cult, yes, they've got their little demolition charges. Outside of that, they're going to struggle. Things like Harsvexes, Exocrines, you really don't need against them. Zoanthropes are going to be pretty good against these armies because their strength 7 D3 shot is typically good enough to do good damage against these armies. So you don't need the lances unless it's a specific target. And I think Gene Stealers actually play pretty well into all of these armies. They've got that speed, they've got that punch, and all of these armies, their toughness outside of Necrons isn't that high, where the low strength of Gene Stealers at 4 is enough to work with, especially if you can get some battle shocks off. So typically our better matchups, I think the highest one I saw here was like a 60 or so % with against Grey Knights, and Tau was maybe even a 63%, but overall here. And if you were figuring out there's one matchup left going into our top tier, and that is Leagues of Votann. Now actually this is where I think I had the biggest dispute with the Goonhammer stats. Obviously it's my anecdotal experience versus raw statistics, so take that with what you will. But Votann, they're a good army right now, and they're one of the highest win rates right now because Votann have a ton of heavy fire. Their Sagittars are very terrifying as long as they roll decent. The Hackathons are good, and the Hearthguard are very, very good as well. They've got great army-wide durability and toughness. Really, an army of mainly T6 in the competitive list, T6 and higher, is tough to deal with. 2-up saves, ability to armor contempt things. It's tough for a lot of armies to crack, specifically Tyranids sometimes. A lot of good character buffs, and then most importantly, they have grudge tokens to allow them to focus fire from turn 1. Some of your key targets, make them easier to hit, easier to wound, easier to bring down, which is good. And then those grudge tokens will continue on as you kill their models later on in the game. However, Tyranids have a lot of good counters to this. The biggest thing is Votann are army-wide leadership 7. I don't think there is a single model that is regularly used that is better than leadership 7, meaning Neurolictors can do a pretty good job of battle shocking these Votann every single turn, along with some Shadow in the Warp. That makes things like their Armor of Contempt strats not able to go off. You get +1 to wound these guys, which counters their Hearthguard's -1 to wound if your strength is higher. Does not negate the Neurolictor +1 to wound, so that allows you to start racking up damage there. They have pretty meh ballistic skill, right? Ballistic skill 4 unless they have a grudge token, meaning if you have a good placed unit of Venom Thropes, you're going to be hitting on 5s, 4s if it's grudge tokened, so that's pretty good for you there. They like to deep strike their big block of 10 Hearthguard. They don't typically, I don't think you can stake all 10 inside of a Hackathon. Maybe you can, but that big block is a real threat. And then they have a lot of heavy support shooting that likes to come on through strategic reserves. This army is very susceptible to having good screens. So if you got Biovores, Gargoyles, Ripper Swarms, and you're able to screen out and put that Hearthguard block in a sector which is just not optimal for them, then that's awesome, because they are slow once they're on the board. Yes, they have good firepower, but they're slow, so they're not going to get into melee, which is also where they want to be. A lot of the units can do well with the whole battle shock. They have their main infantry, the Hearthguard, again, 2 wounds, 2-up save, toughness 6 is nasty. Melee warriors are good against them, especially with the help of the Neurolictors. Maliceptors, Zone Thropes are very good. The whole D3 wound one can start plinking those things away pretty quick. Emissaries are actually pretty good against these guys, because outside of the Sagittar guns, they don't really have a way to reliably chunk off emissary damage, especially if they can't use any of their strats, as long as you get that emissary on her key objective. Tyrants can do pretty well into these guys. Again, they have the ability to have an extra to wound them a little bit better. They got that good damage, decent AP. But yeah, overall, Votann, no easy matchup, but I think Tyranids have a lot of things going for them. Especially, I don't think I mentioned, a lot of Votann that makes them good in the meta is their anti-vehicle keyword on a lot of their big guns. Tyranids are monsters. We don't care about that. Makes their big guns that they tech into a lot less effective. So that is pretty much it. Here's the total, as you can see. So 1 S tier, 1 F tier, a handful of A, B, and a handful of C and D. Pretty balanced all in all, considering. And yeah, that's what I got. I thought it would be a fun one after playing a lot of games so far in 10th edition. Yes, we have the Admech Codex and the Necron Codex coming out. Maybe that shifts where they play. But again, this is just general feeling of how the armies fit. Do you think I got these right? Is there one you think is way too high or one that's way too low? Let me know in the comments. Again, this is just from some statistical references and from my own anecdotal experience. Maybe your meta and your local community is totally different. I'd love to hear in the comments. But that's all I got. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time here at Maelstrom Gaming Studios.